name is Tanya Willard. I'm from the Sconlith community in the Secwepemc Nation. I make space for Indigenous languages throughout this panel, throughout our time together. It can be difficult to navigate spaces where Indigenous languages are not known or are invisibilized, and so it is also in practice with my language teachers that I introduce you to myself, my language, and in some ways my land. And I mention this because it picks up on themes for the residency here. This theme of citation, where we're thinking through different practices and how they relate to identities, lands, bodies, and knowledge. So I wanted to introduce myself in my language and make space for those Indigenous languages here as well to be heard. They connect us in ways to our lands, to our ancestors, and so I want to make space for that. So thank you. We're going to start with a few announcements just for different things happening during the residency. I know there's a number of classes joining us here today, members of the public, our artists in residence, and many of you who are joining us for the first time or the second time. If you were here last week, we had a wonderful panel with curator Candace Hopkins and artists who participated on that panel, Peter Morin, Lindsay Nixon, and I was sitting on the panel. Sorry everybody, my brain is filled with leaking details. Audie, right next, sorry Audie. I'm just going to say sorry a lot because I have a lot of details in my brain. Audie, who is an amazing artist who's joining us, and actually and some of you are heading out today. And I'm so thankful for the time the artists have given us and for their work in studio and in ways that allow us to relate to different knowledges that they're researching through their artistic practices. So thank you. So some of those announcements are quickly so that we have safe sort of time together. I mean this broadly in the sense of, you might not know this, but UBCO is a scent-reduced campus, our scent-free campus, and so please, if you have colognes, perfumes, bodily deodorants, those kinds of things, please just take note when we're in this space together to try to not use those products. Some people are allergic, so I just wanted to remind everyone of that, so thank you. I also want to bring your attention to a number of events during the residency. So we have coming up most soon, we have an event with our keynote today, Jordan Abel, who will be introduced later. We're very excited to have Jordan, as well as Ariel Twist, who's here in residence, and also an open mic. And Matt Rader from the Creative Writing Program has worked with Aaron Scott in Inspired Word Cafe, who is here. And so that event is happening on July 11th, and I want to mention it to you because some of you who are in the classes are hoping to attend some of those events, and it actually fills up in there very quickly. And so please arrive early for that event if you're attending. We also have an opening with artist Ryan Feddersen, who's here, Ryan. And Ryan's opening at the Alternator Gallery, Seeking Visions for a Better World. Seeking Visions for a Better World. I was going to say future, so I was like, I better just ask you to. And so Ryan's exhibition opens on July 12th. And you also will have seen a postcard that's circulated that is asking for your participation. Thank you, Catherine. And submissions for that show, which is, I understand, collaborative and cumulative in Ryan's iteration of that. So please join us for that July 12th. Of course, we also have a show coming up in association with this residency with the Snotty Nose Res Kids at the Rotary Center for the Arts. And so tickets are available for that on the Rotary Center. And if you are one of the artists in residence or the artists in residence or our keynotes, please RSVP for those events to Tracy Ross, who you've received by email, quite soon because those tickets are selling out quickly. We're very excited to have Chelsea Robinson work with us to bring, with her En Route project, to bring Snotty Nose Res Kids here. We consider them in the continuum of artist practices in terms of their work in hip-hop and their Trapline tour. So please look for that and figure that out soon because those tickets are selling fast. So I want to again thank everyone who's here for the artist residency, who has joined us, is joining us, and who are leaving shortly. Also, another quick announcement that the FINA Gallery, for some of you who are students, also for artists in residence, is available. Catherine Pickering, who's teaching one of the first year studio classes, thank you Catherine, is available to discuss that, but there's a sign up on the door. So if you have work, it's an open sort of gallery studio time. So if you have work you want to work on within the studio, you want to have some collaboration or some performance space or documentation space, please make use of that space. We want to see it activated. So please sign up. Don't be shy. Let's get in there. Make some kinds of visible things happening in there. So, thank you for putting up with those brief announcements. I'm going to introduce Richard Armstrong shortly here. Thank you, Richard. And Limt for joining us. Richard Armstrong has joined us several times throughout the residency. Richard is a Syilx elder, a knowledge keeper, educator. I'm sure I'm truncating your biography, many things. And we've had the honor of having both Richard Armstrong and Jeanette Armstrong speak at the intensive in years past. And we're always very appreciative for that. We're here in Syilx territories, in Syilx lands. I'm from a neighboring Secwepemc Nation, and I come here in my mind with stories of relations between our communities and thinking through what being on Syilx land here as unceded territory, what that means for us and what that compels us to do in relation to Syilx people. So thank you, Richard, so much for joining us today.
I didn't get page not see the franchise question. My English name is Richard Armstrong. My Syilx name is Syilx, and thank you for that great introduction. Last year, I remember, and the year before, talking to this group. I just came back from a trip from the Arrow Lakes, Slocan area, working with the Okanagan Nation Alliance. I'm called on by the nations to do a lot of work for them. And one of the things that I did over the past week was work with the Valhalla organization that is looking after a wetland at the top end of the Slocan Lake. So that was a real hard trip for me to hurry back yesterday, drive like a madman to get back. But I'm glad to be here. What I want to talk a little bit about, and what I talk about every year, is Syilx. What is Syilx? You know, and who we are as a nation. And we do respect the alliance between the Secwepemc Nation and the Syilx Nation. That alliance stands for hundreds of years at Accord, at Chaparral Lake Accord, that the nations got together and worked to share territory. Our territory, our Syilx-speaking nation, I want to tell you a little bit about is my mom is from Inchulin, Washington. And my dad is from Penticton. That really tells a whole lot about our people because all of Washington right into Wenatchee is Syilx-speaking nation territory. And it basically from Wenatchee up the Columbia River, up through the Arrow Lakes, through all of the lakes area up there, all the way up to Revelstoke, including Trout Lake and Watson Lake and all those other lakes. And from basically near Micah Dam down towards Enderby, and over towards Douglas Lake. Douglas Lake is one of our 7 nation bands on this side of the 49th parallel. and then on down over the mountain to the metal drainage system over the Princeton area and over to the metal drainage system that Metal River drains into the Columbia just above Wenatchee. That is Syilx speaking nation territory. We're called Okanagans. And do you know where that word Okanagan came from? Do you know, is that word in the dictionary? I haven't found it. And the reality of that word, it comes from the Syilx word Okanagan. And the mispronunciation by the people that couldn't pronounce our words like we do, coming through our territory, couldn't say Okanagan that well, and they say Okanagan. How it became possible is there was a fort built at the confluence of the Okanagan River and the Columbia River near Brewster, Washington. They built Fort Okanagan in the early 1800s, 1808, 809, 10 and 11, something like that. That fort is called Fort Okanagan. And the people that started coming up through our valley here to go to the other forts up farther north here, Fort Kamloops and all the other forts all the way up. Through an interpreter that they had with them from the Penticton Indian Reserve, that George Mancha's grandfather was the interpreter for that horses that used to come through our valley here and go to the other fort. And when they first started coming from Fort Okanagan going through the valley bottom, every group of people they came to in the valley bottom, they would ask the people there, what are you? And being asked, what are you, is different than being asked, who are you? If we had been asked, who are you, we would have said we're Syilx. And that's who we are. We're not Okanagan, we're Syilx. But every village they came to, all the way from Fort Okanagan, all the way through up the valley here, every place they came to, the answer was always Okanagan. So by the time they got to Kamloops, they decided, well, every village we came to and everybody we asked, what are they? They said they were Okanagan. So that must be the valley of the Okanagans. And we're not Okanagans, that's the word that was put on us. The reason the difference is so important is I speak my language better than I do the English language. I teach it here at UBCO. I teach it in Penticton. And I have taught several linguists the Syilx language. And when I talk about who we are as Syilx people and how that came about, some people would ask me, well, what does Okanagan mean? You say that you're not Okanagan, you're Syilx, and every time they asked your people what you were, you said Okanagan. What is that word, Okanagan? And what that is it comes from 3 root words. Our language is so precise that we never needed a written language. To write our language would be basically a step backwards. Our language was so clear, so precise, that you never needed, you couldn't misinterpret for anything else, because of the root words that are in whatever is being said. I compare it to the language of the botanists. You know, the botanists that they write about, take the common dandelion, there's the common word for dandelion. They add a prefix to that word and it tells you the species, and then they add a suffix to it and it tells you the genus and so on. By the time they're finished with that word's about this long. And our language is a lot like that, but a botanist, when they hear that word, they know what all of those things mean. Our language is a lot like that, and there's no guessing at or having to assume what's being said. And the English language, you have to assume what is being said. When I went to school, I had to learn English in public school. And the thing that was really hard for me is I always found that my teachers never spoke in complete sentences. I always had to assume what was being said. So a lot of us in that class end up in a thing called slow learners class. Not because we're slow learners, but because the language that was spoken to us was never complete. We had to assume what was being said. Being Syilx, a lot of us had to go through that, and I studied many things, not only the language, but I also enjoyed reading some of the great anthropological works of the great anthropologists that came through our territory. Some of the great anthropologists that came through our territory married our women, lived on the reserve, lived with us, and wrote a lot of things that they thought they were seeing happening. And a lot of my students are reading these great anthropological works of anthropologists over the years, and taken that information that the anthropologists write as being the truth. The Bible may be like, they believed every word that was said. When I started studying those anthropological works, in some places I literally had to laugh out loud, because not being a residential school survivor, I grew up on the reserve in the mountains with my grandmother, grandmothers, and grandfathers, and brought up all of my life to be a carrier of the traditional ways of ceremony, prayers, and that's why they call me a knowledge keeper. Not because I know everything. Anyway, some of these great anthropological writings, when I was reading them, our vast knowledge of plants, just the plants, botanists are still coming to our people and asking them to go out on the land with them and telling them what this plant is, and is it poisonous, is it medicinal, is it edible, and all that stuff. And I started wondering how my grandmother and my aunts and my uncles were so knowledgeable about plants. And I wanted to find out what it was all about. And so I read the great anthropological works on the section that said plants, and Okanagan, Thompson, Okanagan people. And when I started reading that, some of these words that were written there, the anthropologist would say, their vast knowledge of medicinal, poisonous, and edible was by trial and error. When I read that, I had to laugh, because it would be, here, try this. Oh man, you died. But if we mix it with this, you might not die here. It wasn't like that. When you think about the great works that they studied, and they talk about the vision quests and puberty training and things like that. Those are the places that really taught us what is poisonous, what is medicinal, what is edible. And how that came about is when during the puberty, the elders would take you up into the mountains, and there's a whole ritual that is done with certain foods you have to eat, and you have to stay there for 2-3 days and drink only certain things, and you have a caretaker. What happens during that time is that in most cases there's a hole in the ground lined with rocks, and you sit in there and your face is level with the land. Your eyes are level with the land, and you are continuously being told you're not above plants, birds, and animals, and everything that's alive. You are not superior to any of these people. They're the ones that need to teach you about what it is to be connected to the land. That kind of connection to the land and who we are as Syilx is something that was done hundreds of years ago. No one hardly does that now. There's a few people in this day and age that went through that training. And have you ever seen pictographs in our territory? Our territory has pictographs, rock paintings on all the trails throughout our territory. Those pictographs, I met a man who told me that he studied pictographs for 23 years or something like that, 21 years. He spent many years of his life studying pictographs from the far north throughout our territory, Hopi territory, our nation, through the Peru and all of those places that did pictographs. And I found out that he told me, he said, I know what pictographs are. Holy, I am really interested in this man. I want to find out, what he writes about rock paintings and what that's all about. I went to visit him, and I sat down with him, and he was talking about his life's work, studying pictographs. And the things that my grandmother and my grandfather told me about pictographs and what they are, and why they're on the rocks, on the trails. And I knew quite a bit about that. And so I wanted to find out this man's great writings. After going through a whole bunch of them, showing me pictures, pictographs that were similar between the north, the middle ground, and down south. Some pictures are fairly close. And he concluded that that was an effort to produce an alphabet, a written language. And I was kind of shocked to hear that, that he would decide that pictographs were an attempt at a written language or a written form of an alphabet or something like that. I never said nothing to him. I just listened to his talk and felt sorry for him and went home. But the thing is, pictographs in our territory are, when you understand what a vision quest is, when you're up in the higher mountains and you're being guided by elders to speak to our parents. Our parents are the four-leggeds, the water creatures, the flying creatures, and the plants with their roots. Before there was humans, those were the only animal people on this continent. There were no humans, only these four kingdoms. Those four kingdoms of the four-leggeds, water creatures, flying creatures, and the plants with their roots ruled the entire land. They had great chiefs and they got along in such perfect harmony. The Creator made them work their lives together where they depended on each other, they needed each other. There was no wars, there was nothing like that. And it was perfect harmony. Our elders tell us that that system of the four kingdoms we call today the four food chiefs had been told by the Creator that the human Syilx was going to be coming and that they're going to be responsible for providing everything for them, that they are going to be the children of the four-legged water creatures, flying creatures, and the plants with them. From that. And usually when there's a board, when I'm doing this in class, I write the name that's called Syilx, the very first level, because the piece that was torn from each creature, from the four-leggeds, from the water creatures, from plants, and the flying creatures and the roots, the Creator, we're told, looked at that system and said, such a perfect system. If I took something from the four-leggeds, something from the water creatures, flying creatures, and the plants with the roots, and made the ultimate being from the best there is, there's nothing that gets more perfect harmony than what I've created here as the four-legged water creatures, flying creatures, and the plants themselves. If I took a little piece of every one of them and made the ultimate being, then the four kingdoms of the four-legged water creatures, flying creatures would provide everything that they need, because they would be like the child of. If we're part of the four-leggeds, if we're part of the four-leggeds, of the flying creatures, the water creatures, if we're part of them, they must be like our parents. If they're my parents, then they're obligated to provide the best chance for me to survive. Now, how did they provide that best chance of survival? They were told that each of those first being, that first being was more creature than human. In our language, it's called Syilx, from the word til, meaning torn from, and Syilx, the word Syilx comes from the word, the being that has the ability to dream and think, and different than an animal. And Syilx comes from the word space, meaning talking about the brain. Now, Syilx means torn from these four kingdoms. That's the first being of our people, of who we are. And the Chaptik, the stories that talks about this, says that when the four-legged and the water creatures see this very first being that's supposed to be their child, that they're going to be responsible for ever and ever and ever, the Creator told them this is the ultimate creature, the ultimate being. My grandmother telling me this story says, in her words, when the four-legged chief was looking at, the chief of all the four-leggeds was Syilx, he was looking at this thing. And my grandmother used the word thing. He said, this thing that's supposed to be the child, supposed to be the ultimate creature, is the poorest example of an ultimate creature that he'd ever seen, because it's got no fur, it's got no hoofs, you know, and it doesn't graze on the land to eat all the good herbs and everything. And as a parent, the only thing that he is tasked with for providing for this creature, this thing that's his child, is to provide whatever he can to make sure this creature, this Syilx, survives. The bear, he says, only thing I can offer is my hide. And I speak for everything with 4 legs, because I am the leader of everything with 4 legs on this land. And because we're tasked with providing for this child of ours, our child can take anything with 4 legs, and because it has no fur and it has no hoofs, and that it has to take the hide and make something that's going to keep them warm and put on their feet. And if they take my hide, they can't just discard the rest of my carcass. They have to do something with it, so they don't eat grass or herbs or things on the land. They should consume my body. And if they take that, then they've got to take care of the bones too, respect the bones of where they come. The 4-legged parent says, that's all I have. I have nothing else to offer this ultimate being called Syilx. The chief of all of the things that were in the water said, that's my child too. The Creator said that the part of us from in the water is taken to make this thing called Syilx. It's really good that you give it, you know, your hide and your meat and your bones and everything else like that. But our child can't live on meat alone. It has to have the things from the water, the kinds of meat. It can't just live on wild meat. It has to have things from the water, like salmon, like that kind of stuff that we need to offset just to dry meat from the animal 4-legged. And the water creature says that for my child, I will provide everything they can get from the water, from the highest mountain to the deepest ocean. They can take anything that's in the water. My child has the right to do that. Now, we have meat and we have fish, and we can eat anything in the water, whatever that is, from the highest mountain to the deepest ocean. Our flying parent said, that's my child too. You've given it meat and you've given it everything in the water, fish and whatever else they can get out of the water. But look at our child. Our child only has 2 legs. How is it going to catch something with 4 legs? How is it going to get something out of the water? As the parent, I will provide the tools for our child to get the 4-legged, to get the things out of the water. Those tools will be provided by the flying creatures of how to do that. That's what we got from our flying parent. The last parent that spoke was the plants. The plant said, well, that's my child too. You've given it meat, you've given it fish, everything else in the water they can get, and you've given it the means to do that. But because our child doesn't graze on the land for the good herbs, it's going to be sick. It eats different way. And as the parent of the plants, I will provide the things that can fix their stomach if they get from eating meat and fish and other things like that. But the parent that was the plant said, you've given it meat, you've given it fish and everything else in the means, but they can't just eat meat and fish and all those other things. On the plant parent, I'm going to also provide vegetables, the things that they can, roots that they can eat with fish and meat. And they provide for us the potatoes and the carrots and the onions and the celery. We have that on our land, on our territory. I take my students out to show them what a celery looks like, what a carrot looks like, what potatoes look like. If I took a handful of wild celery and you went and got a handful of the leaves of the celery from downtown, put it behind my back and asked you to smell which hand has the celery, they're identical. There's no difference. The potatoes are a little smaller, but they're potatoes. Carrots are carrots. They're smaller, but that's what they are. Now we have all of that. Again, I go back to the great anthropological works of understanding some of that. Trying to understand if the animal parent says, I have nothing to give my child except my hide because he's got no fur. He can turn this into cloth to use as his, to keep warm. That method of turning skin, an animal skin, into the softest cloth you can find is a pretty complicated formula. How did we get that complicated formula of the ingredients needed to turn that into a soft cloth? How did we know that this plant is poison? That one looks like it, but it's edible. That one over there looks similar to that, but it's medicine. How did we learn that? How did we know that? Not by trial and error. At the Vision Quest, the animal parents came to our minds because, remember that word, spell, the ability to have the mind to accept that in a dream form or state. And our animal parents being obligated to provide us with knowledge during the home on top of the mountains, the animal parent would come to the mind right in our brain and tell us, I am your plant parent. I'm here to tell you, and I'm going to put it in your brain where you will never forget which one is poisonous, which one is edible, and which one is medicine. To this day, most of our people can walk the land and identify plants that botanists are still trying to understand. Our vast knowledge of things like that came from our parents themselves. Now, back to pictographs. You walk our territory, you see these pictographs on the rocks, not up in the high mountains, down in the lower valley to where all the trails are. Vision quests didn't happen down in the valley, they happened high in the mountains. Those pictographs on the rocks, over centuries, hundreds of years, people writing on this rock, that tells the people that I am knowledgeable about plants because my animal parent told me, and it's my job to make my people healthy, or cure them, or use the medicines, or help them realize what to dig for roots to eat. Now, if the four-legged parent came to us, and they came to us, supposing it was the animal parent that was the grizzly bear, came to us in that Vision Quest state, it wasn't this big grizzly bear that you see. It's this depiction of the spirit that was in our minds. These are the pictographs on the rocks. Those pictographs are not an alphabet. They are what our parents looked like to us in our minds. This kind of information that I'm telling you was illegal. It was against the law, an indictable offense up until the late 60s, early 70s. We now have lawyers that can tell us the date that those things are removed from written law, that you can't talk to a gathering of people, even your own people. My dad was threatened with going to jail for talking to about 12 or 15 people at the house, at our house. And the people found out about it and they said, you're not allowed to talk about that. Talking about the things I just finished telling you, our understanding of our world, Syilx worldview. That worldview is so different than Western society's worldview. The government joined forces with the black robes to take that away from our thinking. Because of that kind of thinking, that everything out there, if every plant is my parent, if everything with 4 legs is my parent, if everything in the water is my parent, that's pretty scary to a government that wants to take the plants and the timber and whatever have you. That was why they made that against the law. They joined forces with the black robes and the provincial government and whatever other government, formed a thing called residential school to brainwash us out of that kind of thinking. But now, that is no longer an offense, no longer against the law. It's no longer on the law. It's not. We can't go to jail for talking to you. If I leave from here, they can't arrest me. We're telling you our worldview. So to me, nowadays, in this present day, there's so many of our people that are coming back to live on the reserve, not knowing that connection to the land, that understanding of the true feeling that you get when you're out there. And when I say the first being, I'm not saying an indigenous being, I'm saying a human being. That's not just indigenous, that's human. When I have some friends that are so tired of the concrete jungle, big cities, the first thing they do is they say, I want to go out into the country and commune with nature. Feel that goodness of the birds and the trees and the sunlight and the air. What is that? Why do you feel that goodness when you're out there? Because that is your parents. They're there to make you feel good. They're there to let you know that they'll be there for you forever. I asked my grandmother, you told me my parent is a 4-legged animal. My grandmother says, yeah, that's what I told you. I told my grandmother, well, do you know how many animals have 4 legs? Which one is my parent? And why do I have so many animals with 4 legs that are my parent? Is every one of them my parent? My grandmother laughed, chuckled, and said, that's really good for you to ask that question. Simply because the Creator has made it so that no matter how long we are humans, there will always be four-leggeds, even if that group of parents of ours no longer exists. In other words, what do they, when they become extinct or something like that, there's still other four-leggeds. That's why there's so many different four-leggeds. That's why there's so many different flying creatures. That's why there's so many creatures in the water, from the highest mountains to the deepest ocean. They are promised to take care of us forever and ever. I was talking to a group of kids at school about this, and they were asking me, are they still taking care of us today? I told them that's a really good question. It's true. Pretty nearly every medicine you can think of comes from the plants. We're the only creature walking this land that depends on the milk of an animal. All other animals have their parents' milk. We tell our kids, you have to have this milk to make your bones strong and healthy. And you think about the kinds of meat, the kinds of things that, vegetables, the kinds of things that are provided for you through the whole term of your life. They're still your parents. That is the kind of traditional ecological knowledge that I was brought up with. That is what I'm tasked with talking about, because I'm no longer afraid to go to jail. I don't know how long they're giving me this mic, but that's the short version. My story is, I can talk about this for about 2.5 to 3 days. And if I keep this mic any longer, they have this hook, you know, and they ring a bell and they put it on my neck and right now. Why, bisnak Syilx limtamsman. Bisnak Syilx piayat. At least goes to the Polopolistums, at least Kashbakas, to weakness, Polopolistums. Without Nikum Nimsum was dozen them that's Kilson Fats in of the town Nikwikosi, because scale Nimsum. That must it's Hella.